Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking a look at the Black Box Simulations Britten Norman Islander. I'm sure that many of you may already be familiar with Black Box Simulations as they released their Cessna L19 Bird Dog for Microsoft Flight Simulator. In fact it was one of the earliest add-ons to release for the sim. Anyway, with all that being said, here we are today looking at the Black Box Simulations Britten Norman Islander. The Islander is an aircraft that I'm really fond of and I thought would be great fun in Microsoft Flight Simulator for a spot of island hopping. Anyway, for the flight today we are currently on the ground at Sumburgh Airport out towards the south of the Shetland Islands, and we'll be taking a quick trip up north towards the Outer Skerries. It should be a really good little test for the Britten Norman Islander. It's exactly the sort of flight that the aircraft was designed for. As usual, we'll first take a look at the external modelling and texturing of the aircraft. We'll then do the same in the cockpit. After that we'll carry out a full startup using the real-world checklists and make our way over towards the Outer Skerries. Once we've flown our approach and we're on the ground there, we'll shut the aircraft down and then I'll give you my overall thoughts and opinions on the product. As always guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video and find it to be of use. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comment section below and I'll always do my best to answer them. But now let's continue with our walk around and external inspection of the aircraft. From a distance, I think that Black Box Simulations have done a reasonable job with the aircraft. You can see that the aircraft certainly looks like an Islander. All of the shaping and proportions seem to be broadly correct, and the liveries, whilst certainly not high resolution, seem to be at least broadly accurate in terms of their colouring and design. It's certainly worth noting that whilst the liveries are rather low resolution by modern standards, you do at least get a large number of them and it covers quite a nice wide range of airlines. Again, looking at the model from the top down, you can see that it does a pretty decent job of representing the Britten Norman Islander. Unfortunately though, as we start to zoom in, you can see that there are many areas around the aircraft that are lower in poly count than we're used to now with Microsoft Flight Simulator. Looking at the aircraft's nose in the shot here for example, of course it should be a nice rounded smooth surface, and instead we can see quite a few jagged lines making up the contours of the nose. And it's the same story unfortunately throughout the aircraft really, as you can see with the engine cowling. Again, quite a few jagged edges and some rather low resolution textures on the prop spinner. All of the doors on the aircraft are operable as one would hope, and you can see there are a couple of minor details like the luggage in the baggage compartment for example. But the Black Box Simulations Britten Norman Islander is missing a lot of the external fixtures and fittings that we're now coming to expect from a Microsoft Flight Simulator add-on. So for example, no chocks, no external power unit, no pitot cover, things of that nature. Lastly, a quick look at the cockpit from the outside of the aircraft, and overall again, it's nothing special but it's certainly more than good enough for its purposes as far as the external model goes. So in summary, as far as the external modelling and texturing of the aircraft goes, I think it's fair to say that it is more up to the FSX P3D standard rather than a Microsoft Flight Simulator standard. I know that Black Box Simulations do also produce the Britten Norman Islander for those sims. Once again though, from a distance I think that the external model holds up well enough, and hopefully in the future we'll see some much more high resolution paints from the community. So that should go a long way in bringing the aircraft up to standard, although of course you'd really like to see that from a developer when you're paying for the product. Anyway, we'll now head into the cockpit and see what we find in there. The cockpit, once again, really very much the same as the outside of the aircraft. As you can see, overall it's passable. The modelling, I have to say, isn't bad. Certainly in the more visible areas of the cockpit, I think the level of detail there is solid. And in some areas, I think that the texturing is quite nice, but then in others it's very basic. The combing over the top of the panel, for example, that looks rather dated. The instruments, again, they look okay, but from a distance some of them can be a little bit tricky to read. And again, you'll notice some quite rough edges around the instrument bezels there. Also, as you'll see throughout the video, quite a few of the instruments are missing minor details here and there. For example, the artificial horizon doesn't have an index for the bank angle. We'll cover that more as we go, of course, though. Again, I think that some areas of the cockpit actually look quite nice. For example, here I think the texturing is overall very well done. We have a nice chrome effect on the yoke. I think that all of the engine controls look pretty good. The same goes for the switches and the instrumentation. The more hidden away areas of the cockpit certainly rather low in terms of their level of detail. And the same goes in the cabin really, very basic down the back. Again, it doesn't really bother me in the slightest. Obviously the Islander is a pretty basic aircraft, I don't think you'll be finding any first-class lounge on board. But again, if you are someone that values these things, then you might be somewhat underwhelmed by the texturing and the modelling down the back. Finally, in terms of the night lighting, again, good enough. We have various options available to us, namely instrument lighting, panel lighting, and cabin lighting. So welcome to the cockpit of the Black Box Simulations Britten Norman Islander. We've just got ourselves sat down, we'll run through the pre-start checks. So battery can come on, pilot door is closed and locked, pilot seat has been adjusted and is secure, cabin doors are closed, safety belts are secure, parking brake is on, rudder and elevator trim tabs are checked and set, fuel selectors are both on, OAT indicator currently showing around 22 degrees outside air temperature. Generator low voltage warning lamps are both indicating on. Altimeters are set and checked. Clock is set. Electrical power will be starting on the battery. Cabin heater is off. Fuel contents showing about 30 US gallons in each of the main tanks, which is more than enough for the short hop up to the Outer Skerries this morning. Compass showing a heading of about 0.75 on the compass, and the same on the directional gyro. Engine and flight instruments are checked. Circuit breakers are checked in. Flight controls are full free and in the correct sense. Flaps. So we'll select the flaps down to the landing position. And they were indicating flaps down. And the flaps are indeed down. We'll select the flaps back up. I have to say those flap sounds are suspiciously similar to the FSX flap sounds. Anyway, we're indicating flaps up. Radios are off. Avionics master is off. Throttles are closed. Propeller controls are fully forward. Mixtures are in the full rich position. Carpeets are in the cold position. External supply, starter isolation switch will set to external supply for the start. Generator switches are both off. And for the start itself, we'll get the beacon light on. Fuel selectors are both set on. Auxiliary fuel pump, we'll start the right hand engine first so that can come on, as can the right hand engine fuel valve. We'll pump the throttle 4 times to prime the engine. And we'll set the throttle about 1/10 open. We'll open up the DV window, checking that the prop area is clear, which it is. We'll be starting on the left-hand magneto only, which is a little bit unusual. Clear prop! Now we'll engage the starter. As soon as the engine catches, we'll bring in the right-hand magneto. Checking that the oil pressure has come up into the green. And we'll leave the engine idling around 1000 RPM. So, same procedure for the left-hand engine now. The fuel selector is on. Fuel valve and auxiliary fuel pump can come on. We won't pump the throttle this time as my throttles are interlinked at the moment, so we'll just end up running the engine up on the right-hand side. Throttle is set 1/10 open, again selecting the left-hand magneto. Prop area is clear. And engaging the starter. Now we have a good start, so the right-hand magneto can come on. Overall, I have to say the engine sounds not too bad, I think. Nice start-up sounds, and the overall level of volume there pretty good. Anyway, oil pressure has come up, that's within the green. Idling at 1000 RPM. Auxiliary fuel pumps can come off. And you do have to be very careful with your selections here, as obviously you could end up potentially cutting the fuel to the engine, which would obviously not be ideal. Generators can come on. The external supply starter isolation switch can go back to the starter position. That actually automatically switches back once you start the engines, but it is a checklist item. Vacuum gauge, we're showing around 4.5 on the vacuum gauge there, so that's within limits. Ammeter, we'll check both of the generators. Showing just below 30 amps on the left. And the same on the right. And we'll come back to battery. Oil pressure is checked. Fuel pressure is checked. Flight instruments are checked. Radios and avionics can come on now. Get the DME on there as well. And the transponder, I've noticed, is currently an op in terms of turning it between on and out and test. Presumably it defaults to the out position, otherwise it's going to make doing any VATSIM flights impossible currently in the aircraft, unfortunately. Anyway, avionics are on. Cabin heat controls are off. Pilot door is closed and locked. Isolation switch is checked. For the warm-up, all we need to do is wait for the engines to warm up such that they respond normally to our throttle inputs, so we'll check that on the taxi out. And for the taxiing itself, of course, making sure that the park brake is off. Door and DV panel are closed. Mixtures are in the fully rich position, pitch in the full fine position. Carpeets are off. Trim tabs are set. Flaps will set to the takeoff position. And we're indicating takeoff. Flaps look to be in the correct position. Fuel, again 30 gallons in each tank. Auxiliary fuel pumps can come on. Engine instruments are checked. Flight instruments are checked. We'll just set the departure heading. So looking to depart on a heading of 027. And you'll notice as well, it looks to be a directional gyro, but there's no selector to actually set the directional gyro heading, so presumably it always aligns automatically with the compass there. If it doesn't, then that would tend to drift and you won't be able to correct that over time. Anyway, the heading is set, and we'll set the VOR as well, so that will be 027 on nav 1. No indicator there, no lubber line to actually set the position, so that makes setting an accurate position slightly tricky. That's around 027, and the Sumburgh VOR 117.35, so we'll set that now. And it looks like we are now picking up the Sumburgh VOR, showing 0.2 DME from the station. So the flight instruments are checked. Pitot and stall heater can come on. Ice protection not required, autopilot not required for now. Flight controls. Again, full free and in the correct sense. Electrics. Just get rid of the yoke momentarily. They are set. Now we'll take the taxi light on. Looks like the switch should have 3 positions by the looks of it. We've got off, taxi and landing. By default that starts in the taxi position there. So we'll call the ground, request a taxi. Ground is 11825. Sorry, that's 255. And we'll be departing out to the north.
Sumburgh Ground Express 0 Tree with Yankee request taxi for takeoff north departure. Express 0 Tree taxi to and hold short of runway tree using taxiway Kilo Golf Whiskey Foxtrot Echo. Contact tower on 118.255 when ready. Taxi to and hold short runway tree via taxiway Kilo Golf Whiskey Foxtrot Echo Express 0 Tree.
Okay, so runway 33 is just off behind us. That's pretty handy. It's a nice short taxi and broadly takes us out in the direction we're departing. Park brake can come off. Just come up on the power slightly to get the aircraft moving. And we'll start swinging ourselves around, making sure we're clear of this truck. All clear on the right. Again, I think the engine sounds pretty nice overall. So we'll get ourselves down to the holding point. We'll carry out a quick run up. We've already carried out most of the before takeoff checks, so we'll be very shortly ready to go. Another islander just over there on the apron. I believe that's actually the James Bond 007 paint, which is rather cool. Taxi all the way down to the end. We'll take the full length available. Crossing another active runway here. Looks to be all clear on both directions. Overall, the aircraft's very pleasant to taxi. It's not overly sensitive. And you can see, looking at the windsock over there, the wind's pretty dead this morning, so we'll just hold in our present position and run up, align with the taxiway. So park brake on. For the run up itself, we need to come up to 2100 RPM. Making sure the brakes are holding, which they are. So there's about 2100. We'll check the left engine first. So running on the left magneto, there is a slight drop there in RPM. Back to both. Just come back slightly on the throttles there. We've crept up a little bit above 2100. And on the right magneto now. Again, a slight drop in RPM. You can hear the change there as well in tone. Now back to both. And same on the other side. It's on the left magneto. Checks. Back to both. And on the right magneto. It's quite a significant drop, actually, I have to say, with the mag check. It's about 200 RPM there, which is outside of the real world limits, but still a reasonable representation. Check the car peats momentarily. We should really see a drop there with the car peat selected as well. And coming back to 1000 RPM. So the last of the before takeoff items. Auxiliary fuel pumps are on. Engine instruments are checked. Flight instruments are checked. Pitot and stall heater is on. Flight controls have been checked. And the lights. So we'll get the landing light on. Strobe light can come on as well. And we'll call up the tower, request a takeoff.
Sumburgh Tower Express 0 tree at runway tree ready for takeoff departure to the north. Express 0 tree cleared for takeoff runway tree departure to the north approved. Cleared for takeoff runway tree Express 0 tree.
So park brake off. All clear on final. Fairly nice ground roll sounds there as we pick up speed. So plenty of runway here for the Britten Norman Islander. We'll come off the brakes, come all the way up to full power, and we'll rotate around 75 knots. So there's full power, manifold pressure's checked, RPM looks good, T's and P's are all in the green. Overall the aircraft feels reasonable on the rudder. 75 knots coming back on the stick, and we're up. Overall the ground roll sounds not too bad, again they're a little bit digital in nature. We'll climb away around 95 knots. Fixed gear of course on the Islander, so we don't need to worry about getting that up. And just coming through 300 feet we'll take the flaps up.
Express 03 continue for north departure. I will contact you next when you leave my airspace.
Sumburgh Tower Express 03 continue for north departure.
And through 500 feet we'll start our turn out to the north. Interestingly, when I brought the flaps up I noticed quite a bit of nose heaviness there, which is nice to see, as the pilot operating handbook does specifically mention that. I noticed though on the artificial horizon, again there's no index for the bank angle, so that does make flying an accurate bank angle rather difficult. There does seem to be quite a few details on the aircraft that are currently either missing or unfinished, which is a little bit of a shame. Anyway, we're on our heading now 027. We'll climb up to around 3,000 feet or just below the cloud base, whichever comes sooner. And we'll come back now to around 25 inches, manifold pressure, and about 2,500 RPM. Checklist calls for a climb speed of around 95 knots, so we're doing that now. Auxiliary fuel pumps can come off, and again, very careful in making sure that we select the correct switches there.
Express 03, you are leaving my airspace. Frequency change approved.
Okay, we'll stay with Sumburgh for now. We're obviously going to exit his airspace, and then we'll be on traffic later on, once we get out towards the Outer Skerries. And just coming up on 3,000 feet. Once we're at 3,000 feet, we'll level the aircraft off, get her trimmed out, and then we'll put the autopilot in, give that a test. This is the reason I wanted to pick this aircraft up. I love this type of flying.
Express 03, did you copy?
Should have acknowledged his handoff.
Sumburgh Tower Express 03 frequency change.
I still get caught out with that. Never had to do that in FSX and P3D. Yeah, this is really the kind of flying that I just love to do in the sim, island hopping around in something not too speedy, not too flash, but really good fun to fly. Come back to 22 inches and around 2,300 RPM for the cruise. And again, overall the engine sounds not too bad. Certainly passable, I quite like them. In fact, we might even have to descend down again a little bit here, as there is a little bit of cloud just up ahead of us. For now, we'll just come out to the north, swing around the patch of cloud up ahead, see if we can work our way down towards the Outer Skerries at 3,000 feet, just dodging the clouds as we go. Anyway, as I say, we'll get the aircraft trimmed off, which more or less is now. Set the heading bug to our current heading. Click spot on the heading bug, a little bit fiddly, I could use some work. Quite a few of the click spots in the aircraft are a little bit fiddly actually. And we'll set the autopilot. So 3,000 feet. Set the autopilot on, we'll go out and heading. See what sort of a job the autopilot does there. Overall pretty good, certainly better than the Coronado effort that we saw in my last review video. Anyway, as you can see we're currently tracking to the north. We'll head back out towards the northeast momentarily. We'll try and pick up that VOR radio as we head inbound towards the Outer Skerries. Doing ground speed around 140 knots at the moment, so quite a nice speed there. Looks like we don't have too much of a tailwind. Just come slightly further out to the north, just again to avoid the west of this cloud layer. Showing about 12 miles to run at the moment, so as usual we'll head outside the aircraft, take a look at some of the external views en route, and I'll come back to you again as we start our descent and approach into the Outer Skerries. So as you can see, we are now approaching the Outer Skerries. We'll call up traffic and report our position. Anticipating coming in on runway 09. The wind's pretty dead there this morning.
Echo Golf 78 Traffic Express 039er miles southwest 2,500 feet inbound to land runway 9er.
We'll descend down to 1,500 feet. We'll pass over the field at 1,500. Make sure the runway is cleared, see what the windsock's doing. So there's 1,500 selected. We'll hit down. As you'll see, the autopilot is rather aggressive in nature. It's pretty crude. It will just dump the nose down. Eventually it does actually bring the descent rate back again, but again, a very crude basic autopilot. All the usual issues that we see in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Just keeping an eye on our airspeed there. As you can see, the descent rate is now easing off. Anyway, we'll start the pre-landing checks. So harness is secure, pilot seat is secure. Fuel. Showing just above 20 gallons in each tank there, so plenty of fuel. Engine instruments are checked, mixtures are fully rich. Carb heat is cold. Props will leave as they are for now. Auxiliary fuel pumps can come on. Warning lights are extinguished. Cabin heater is off. Autopilot will leave on for the moment. We'll disconnect that once we're overhead the field. Brakes have been tested and are off, and the pitot and stall warning heat is on. So just coming up on 1,500 feet. Fairly pleasant day over here in the outer reaches of the Shetland Islands. The wind's pretty benign overall. I think it is actually slightly favouring runway 27, but the approach onto runway 9er is much more straightforward. And it's a slightly uphill slope as well, so it's preferable in terms of braking. Can't make out the field just yet, but we can just about make out the lighthouse off the nose. The field just out to the northwest of that. So we'll disengage the autopilot, we'll do a little bit of manual flying, get a bit more of a feel for the aircraft. Overall, I have to say the aircraft's very pleasant to fly, it's very smooth. Very easy to control. As with many Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, it doesn't feel like the highest fidelity flight model that you'll ever set your hands on, but to be fair, it does feel a little bit different from some of the other Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft. Not to say that it's better, it just does feel noticeably different. Just make out the runway now down off our 10 o'clock. So as I say, we'll have a look at the runway state, make sure it's clear. Try and spot the windsock as well if we can. Come back on the power, start descending down to 1,000 feet. You can see if we come in on 27, we do have a little bit more terrain to contend with. Hence why we're choosing runway 09 if the windsock looks reasonable. And just coming up on 1,000 feet now, so back up to 22 inches manifold pressure. Yeah, the windsock, as you can see, is slightly favouring runway 27 there. Doesn't look to be too much wind around though, so we'll come in on runway 09 as we planned. Just track outbound on a crosswind leg momentarily. And we'll start turning around onto our downwind now. Cool downwind.
Echo Golf 78 Traffic Express 03 is on downwind runway 9er.
So brakes are checked and off, undercarriage is down, mixture is rich, fuel pumps are on, instruments are checked, landing light can come on, and harness is secure. Give ourselves a nice long final, give us time to bleed off some speed. And coming back on the power now, let the speed come back and we'll take a stage of flap as soon as we can. And again, as that speed comes back, really having to use quite a bit of force on the controls to keep the nose up. Trimming accordingly, we'll take one stage of flap now. We'll fly the approach initially around 80 knots and we'll aim to be back at 70 knots as we come over the threshold. Okay, there's the runway, just on final now. We'll set the flaps to the landing position. Let the speed keep coming back. So pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set, landing clearance is not required.
Echo Golf 78 Traffic Express 03 is on final runway 9er to land.
And the runway is clear. So we'll try and keep the speed back as close to around 70 knots as we can, obviously a pretty short runway here at Outer Skerries. And we'll aim to touch down as close to the threshold as possible for the same reason. As I say, we do have a slight upslope, so that's going to help us with the landing distance. A little bit of sink there, correcting that. And off the power, flaring the aircraft. There's touchdown, braking as soon as we touch down. And bring the aircraft to a stop. Pretty tight space here, but we'll turn around on the runway and head back towards the effective parking area. One thing I have found in the Islander is it does have a tendency to want to tip the nose up once you're trimmed for a approach speed if you're on the ground and you're not careful. I can't imagine that's accurate, so you do have to be careful on that. And also, if you make a very sharp turn, you'll find it quite difficult to correct. The aircraft will want to oversteer. So again, something you have to be conscious of and careful of. Anyway, we'll swing the aircraft around once again. As you can see, no particular parking area here per se at the Outer Skerries, so we'll park it on the runway, get the engine shut down. So part brake can come on. Again, bring the engines up to idle around 1000 RPM. And the afterlanding checks, auxiliary fuel pumps can come off. Flaps can come up. Pitot and stall warning heat can come off. Trim will set back to the neutral position. Cabin heater is off. Avionics can come off. Get that landing light off. And the same for the strobes. And stopping the engines, so the engines are idling at 1000 RPM. Temperatures have stabilised. And to stop the engines we just move the mixtures to the cut-off position. So a good shutdown on the left. And a good shutdown on the right. Again, quite nice shutdown sounds there from the engine. So throttles back to idle. Fuel selectors can come off. Fuel valves can come off. Ignition switches off. Generators can come off. And we'll take the battery off. That is the shutdown checklist complete, and welcome to the Outer Skerries. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our little trip out in the Black Box Simulations Britten Norman Islander. I have to say that overall I'm left with very mixed feelings about the product. I actually really enjoyed my flight in the aircraft, and as I say, it's certainly the type of flying that I like to do in the sim. I can definitely see myself flying the Islander again in the future. But the product is somewhat lacking in a certain attention to detail. For me personally, I don't mind the modelling, I think that's more than adequate. And the same goes for the texturing really. Although some of the textures are fairly low resolution by modern standards, as I say, I'm sure we'll have some helpful third parties come along and create some really nice liveries, maybe even do a little bit of texturing in the cockpit as well. For me personally, I think where the product falls down is all of the little details that have been missed or perhaps disregarded along the way. For example, no switch click sounds in this day and age, certainly a bugbear of mine now when any add-on doesn't have them. And the same goes for all of the cockpit sounds really. There were no sounds when moving the flight controls, which has become a little bit of a staple now in Microsoft Flight Simulator. There was almost no change in sound when we powered the aircraft up. We did have the gyro sounds, but as you could hear, those were on a bit of a loop. I couldn't find any documentation with the product, and I believe that is coming at a later date, but why not just wait until the documentation is complete before releasing the product? I had planned to show a small demonstration at the end of the video with an engine out scenario, shutting down one of the engines and attempting to feather it. Everything seemed to be going quite well in terms of the aircraft's response, but ultimately I couldn't get the prop lever into the feather detent. So once again, I'm left wondering why something like that wasn't completed before the product was released. And in this particular scenario, it may well even be user error on my part. Perhaps there is some hidden click spot that you're supposed to use. But again, without any included documentation, how is the user supposed to know? Anyway, moving on to what I like about the product, and as I say, there are some really nice features of the Britten Norman Islander. I think firstly and foremostly, the aircraft is really good fun. I really enjoyed my flight out, I really enjoyed the trip, and I really enjoyed the style of flying that the aircraft allows you to do. The flight model certainly isn't study level, but overall it feels plausible. The performance feels pretty much as you would expect. The aircraft performs well at low speeds and in and out of short strips. And I did try stalling the aircraft outside of the video, and again, not study level, but certainly better than average within the sim. Systems wise, I thought overall the aircraft was pretty good. Obviously the Britten Norman Islander is a pretty simple aircraft, but as you saw, most of the switches seem to be clickable and have a corresponding system function as a result. I thought that the number of liveries and the general variety available for the aircraft was nice to see, and we also get a couple of different cockpit variants as well, which again I thought was nice. Engine sounds as well I thought were pretty decent throughout the entire flight. They go a long way to giving the aircraft a little bit more atmosphere than it might otherwise have. And once again, the Islander, a very smooth, very pleasant, very fun aircraft to fly. In terms of the aircraft's FPS hit, ordinarily I would say it's not too bad, as it's about 5 FPS below the default Cessna 152. But in this particular case, as the modelling and the texturing is of a lower standard, really if anything I would like to have seen a higher FPS. In terms of pricing, the product is currently only available from the Black Box Simulations website, and the product is currently retailing for €25. Overall though, I do think the product is a little bit pricey for what it is at the moment. The developer does state that there is more to come in the future in terms of free updates, but of course I can only review what I have in front of me at the moment. And for my money, currently the product feels as though it should be sitting more within the €20 range. And so ultimately, if you do have a little bit of cash to burn, and you are looking to have some fun island hopping around the various locations within Microsoft Flight Simulator, particularly if you are a big fan of the Britten Norman Islander, then maybe the black box version of the aircraft is worth checking out. Just be aware that you won't be getting an aircraft that's at the very forefront of what Microsoft Flight Simulator is able to achieve, either graphically or in terms of immersion. I did fork out my own hard-earned money for the aircraft, and I certainly don't regret it. As I say, I had a really fun flight, and I'll certainly fly the aircraft again. I do hope though that as per the website we do see some really significant and meaningful upgrades to the aircraft going forwards. Anyway guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video and once again found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me regarding the product, you can leave those down in the comment section below, and I'll always do my best to answer them. But for now, thanks very much, and I'll see you all again soon.